Welcome to Attican Plays Railway Empire. All right, hi, this is Attican, and welcome to part 4 of our replay of the Gold Rush using version 1.8 beta functionality. Now, you saw there, we're in pretty good shape. We've got all gold checked so far, which means we're on track so far for a perfect score. And we have started our second four-city cluster down here in the LA, San Diego, Yuma, Tucson area. And we're going to continue working on that in this one. We also have set up a brewery down in San Diego because all 4 of those cities down there, LA, San Diego, Yuma, and Tucson, come originally with meat industry, and that's kind of worthless for our 4-city cluster. But we're going to start knocking down those meat industries and put other things in. So what we're doing here is we're going to put a brewery in Yuma. Now our big focus right now in terms of keeping our score high and getting this thing done is to make that alcohol. We have to produce 200 units of alcohol pretty quickly, and we've got a nice setup over in Sacramento. And we're making alcohol there. We've got it up. I think it's at a level 2 right now. It's the highest we could get it. And because of the size of Sacramento, we're trying to grow Sacramento. And we'll work on that some in this episode as well, getting that other 4-city cluster to grow. Our work was focused on Carson City as it needed to be in order to hit our objectives. But now we need to grow the other 3 cities in that cluster over there. But up there you saw I did the kind of cheapo trick of getting a bonus. I connected Elko and then just immediately disconnected it because I don't want to mess with Elko just yet. In fact, actually in this particular one, I decided not to mess with it at all. Now we've got a new train, Rogers American, great express train. So we're going to upgrade all of our passenger mail-only lines to that, so they'll be making us even more money going down the road. We're at that point where money's not our issue anymore. We're doing just fine, thank you very much, as far as money goes. So really, it's going to be very difficult to spend the money as fast as we make it now. I personally just can't build that fast, even with the the slow down, the pause when you're in track layout. It doesn't matter. I can't spend the money that fast. So that's a good thing. That's where you want to be. So we're going to work on, like I said, we're going to continue to build out this little cluster down here, and we need to get some sugar and fruit, especially over to Yuma, so that brewery, or it's not brewery, sorry, distillery that we put in Yuma can get the job done for us and help us hit that goal of producing alcohol. And of course, because it's a 4-city cluster down here, we would want that alcohol in there anyway, because that'll help all 4 cities to grow. So decided, because that brewery's, or distillery, sorry, distillery making alcohol is in Yuma, wanted to put the second warehouse for that 4-city cluster directly attached to Yuma, and that way we can pull the we can load the sugar and fruit directly into that warehouse and make sure that Yuma gets sugar and fruit, gets kind of first crack at it, so to speak, to make sure that that distillery can keep working effectively. So what we're doing here is taking advantage of all these beautiful advanced stations we have now. The fact that because they're so effective and because they can run trains through the 4 platforms and what have you, you can use them as pass-through stations pretty effectively. So here what we're going to do is run sugar down through our system and then over here to this warehouse without having to build a big line up there further to the west or north to go into that warehouse. So we can run the sugar down and make a short connection into the existing line. As you see here, we've got that connection, and then we can run full trains all the way over here to that warehouse, and it'll actually pass through the other warehouse. But that's cool because, again, these things can be done effectively because they really do handle that kind of traffic. Whereas our old stations, that would be very tricky. We'd have to build a bypass or do something else. But as it is, we're just almost being lazy here and saying, okay, this is easy. This is great. This is what we're going to do. So we're going to set up that warehouse to hold all these goods. And main things, we're going to make sure it has sugar and sugar and fruit so that we can make our alcohol in Yuma. So Yuma's going to be really poised, after we get this done, Yuma's going to be really poised to grow because it's got the pass-through relationship with LA through that warehouse that's sitting over San Diego. It's getting goods that way. It's going to get goods directly shipped into this warehouse that's attached to it. Those of course, will be eventually fed to our fourth city over there, Yuma, which is further to the west and south of where we're looking. But Yuma is really in a great shape to grow. So here comes our fruit that we want to run down there into that same system we just set up. And this is all a little clumsy. If I were more of the delete and do it over guy, this of course could be cleaned up quite a bit. But I'm being very focused on just getting the scenario done. So if it comes out, some crossing track and what have you, again, we've got money now. We're making money. We can afford it. And you get a little bit of a spaghetti code look here, spaghetti rails, but it's not that bad. And, again, form follows function for me. I'm trying to get the scenario done. I'm not trying to see how pretty I can make my track. And for me, being organized is about being organized in your approach and strategy. It doesn't mean that you make these pretty tracks where everybody comes into a main trunk line and da-da-da. Now, if we were going to go back and play with this on the long term or doing like a free mode, making a nice looking system, then of course we would go clean up those kinds of things. And you'll see even better example a little later in this video of kind of a lot of stuff going on when we go back over to our other 4-city cluster and try to get those warehouses to work, get warehouses lined up ready to feed San Francisco and Shasta and Sacramento. We've been focusing on Carson City up there to make sure it grows. Now we got to get those other 3 to grow. So now we've got fruit and sugar basically going directly to Yuma, at least to that warehouse that's attached to Yuma. So we should be able to get a good alcohol production going there, and that's going to help us hit our goals there. So now we've got a connection bonus here for that cotton. So we're going to take the money and run basically. It's very clumsy because I've got that track running so near the cotton. It's clumsy to even put a station in there, but it can be done. So we'll finally get it and grab that bonus. So what I'm doing here is checking to make sure LA isn't growing yet. I want to make sure that we're getting goods in there, and I'm checking to see if it would be feasible to run. First of all, I'm checking to see if that LA Yuma line is working, and it seems to be. So what we're going to do now is set up the sugar to run directly into that first warehouse we built, the one between LA and San Diego. So rather than trying to shuttle it back from another warehouse, which is a little more complex, we're just going to run it directly from the sugar line. So I'm going to build a second runway, so to speak, a second waiting room, I'm starting to call them, for the sugar line. And I want to be able to run, and this is weird right here. Did you notice how those were split? When we put in that second line, it appeared that the trains that were coming back to that station actually split. Some of them went to the first, to platform 1, some of them to platform 2. I have noticed too that if you don't specify a line, sometimes the trains seem to spread themselves out. I don't know if they're trying to make that happen now, but that's a little bit of a pain, actually. But then you notice when I specified one, it went back to 0. So it's a little strange behavior going on there. Anyway, we've got our sugar line running. All right, so bumping up, making sure we've got lines running to Tucson to get Tucson playing in this game. Want to have a couple of trains running direct automatic lines between Tucson and each of the cities in the cluster. And again, this shows you how easy it is with these nice big superstations. We don't have to build a bunch of bypasses or extra track or anything. They can run right through one another, pass through these stations beautifully. You don't want to overdo it. That's why I'm just running a couple of trains in each direction. And the main purpose of these trains is to pick up the manufactured goods. It's not to, if there's nothing to pick up goods-wise, we'll haul some passengers and mail. But that's not the point. The point is to have the line ready to pick up the goods. And the beauty of the way the game works is whenever you have one of these city-to-city automatic lines, it will pick up goods first, manufactured goods needed in the destination city, and then it'll top off with passengers and mail, which is perfect, just what we want. So now we've got to set it up so that we can get Tucson to be supplied from that warehouse. So Tucson, of course, needs supplies like all the other cities do. And our first step here is we're going to set up a line that hooks into the warehouse that's at Yuma and goes on down to Tucson, and we can run trains just directly out of that warehouse into Tucson to allow supplies to be brought into Tucson. You can see we're getting nothing right now because we're not running a lot of basic supplies into that Yuma station. Right now, Tucson's very small, and it needs logs and wheat, and we don't have that stuff over there yet. I also noticed that there's wheat. We're low on wheat, period. And again, this is the challenge of trying to build down there with those 5. The wheat is so far away, and we've got some coming down, but it's a long haul all the way down there. So one of the things I kind of didn't do a great job of doing when I was doing that particular cluster was, again, the basic goods into that Yuma warehouse. But we'll come back to that because now we're starting to look at the original 4-city cluster over in San Francisco area. And we've got, you see that warehouse we've got up there at Carson City, so it's getting in some of the goods. But our other 3 cities, we've really kind of neglected them. We've got the city-to-city stuff going. It's making money and what have you, and occasionally they'll grow, but we're not getting a ton of city growth out of these because we haven't really given them supplies yet. And we really want to get that distillery up as high. Level 2 is the highest we can make it right now. We'd love to have it up higher. So we're looking at where we are with the alcohol. We're around, I couldn't read that, 60, I guess, whatever it was. So we're doing all right, but we need to do better. So we're going to work on trying to get that line from, those 3 cities, the remaining cities in our original 4-city cluster to grow by setting up warehouses for them once we deal with a few employees. Now we're back here looking at Yuma again because remember now we've started getting some sugar and fruit into the warehouse so Yuma Distillery can start production. But the cities down here that it connects to are so small, there's not going to be any demand for alcohol for a while. So what we're going to do here is similar to what we did with the other cluster with the distillery. We're going to put in a warehouse and we're going to run a line out and carry that freight, the alcohol, out and store it in a warehouse so that our distillery in Yuma can continue to produce. As long as it has the product, it will continue to produce and put them into this warehouse for storage. And this is weird, doesn't it look like it's like floating in the air? It's just sort of a strange thing with the graphics. But the one thing I would do here, I would recommend, I actually have this is an unusual thing, but we're going to run one little train, so it's no big deal. And we're going to just give it a single track and a supply tower. But I'm going to set it up to run full because there's no point in just bouncing back and forth without a load. So I'm going to have it run full of alcohol and take it out to that warehouse. Well, that's all well and good, except that that's an automated signal station right there. And when you run a train full, that means that one of my 4 tracks that I'm trying to run trains through is going to be tied up most of the time. So this actually worked just fine, but I've really cut down Yuma's throughput capability by 25% by holding up one of those tracks. So if I had this one to do over, I would put in just a little small station in Yuma, and then have the warehouse, the small warehouse off of that, and have that little small station run full and not tie up the Yuma line. That probably would have been a better move. All right, so now it's time to deal with growing San Francisco, Sacramento, and Shasta. So we need to come up with a warehouse system that's going to allow us, or some way of moving goods raw materials into those 3 cities to support their growth. Now in Sacramento, we already have sugar and fruit coming in because we've got that distillery going, and that's very specific for this scenario because we need to get sugar going to make sure that we can hit our objective. But now what we're doing, we're picking out what we're going to put in this warehouse. So we're going to put wheat and corn and logs and milk and veggies, I think it was. But what we're doing here is we're going to set up another line. We're going to expand our log station up there, and we're going to run a line that goes around Shasta and then hooks into the trunk line, that Shasta to Sacramento City to City line. We'll hook it up on one end, then we'll come down here to the other end and tie off so that line can then go out and get to the warehouse, and that'll give us a logs to the warehouse line. Now this one's kind of interesting. I'm kind of in the mood to fast forward this, but I'm not going to because setting this one up is kind of interesting because you have to. It's a somewhat complex setup, and yet in a way it's super simple. So what you're going to see here is, here we go. We're setting up that tie back to the warehouse, so that back to the line, and you'll notice that just in that we didn't really gain that much in terms of, well, gosh, you didn't have to build as much track or anything. It wasn't any big deal in terms of what you gained. But by having it set up like that, you get the flexibility to tie into that line if you use anything else. So it's probably a good approach. But anyway, you can get the idea. Logs come down, they can hit that little city-to-city line, then they branch off and go over here to the warehouse. We can run logs directly into this warehouse in Sacramento, which is kind of on the right side of the track, so to speak, relative to the logs. So that's what all this is about. All right, so here I'm thinking about wheat. How are we going to get wheat into our system? We need to get wheat to Sacramento. We needed to get it to Shasta and to San Francisco. Well, the first thing I'm looking at here is what would it take to run this wheat over to that Sacramento warehouse? You notice I'm going over here and I'm saying, well, gosh, I got to jump over all these people, got to do all that stuff. Well, wait a minute. Wouldn't it be better? I want to have a pass-through warehouse over here between Sacramento and Shasta, because I know that'll work. I know I can pick up that sugar easily for those two cities. So I'm just going to put in the big warehouse with signaling station, hook it up close enough so that it can pick up the sugar. And now I can set up a pass-through line, Shasta to San Francisco, and it'll be easy to run the wheat into that line over there. And now that says, well, I've got my logs to the Sacramento station. My wheat's coming into the pass-through station. Now, do I need to run redundant lines and run the logs over to the pass-through and run the wheat over to the Sacramento? No, we fix that momentarily. But first, let's just deal with what's right in front of us, which is let's get that city-to-city line from connected, and then we're going to play around with, well, how can I get those two lines connected to one another? And they're a little too close. Had I planned this ahead, I could have just built this right off the bat, but I wasn't thinking that far ahead. But what we can do is build a little loop here and run it from our Shasta to Sacramento city to city line over to our Shasta to San Francisco city to city line, and that will allow the two warehouses to kind of talk to each other. And what we can do now is set up a nice situation where we put some of the goods in each of the warehouses and then have a shuttle run them back and forth to balance out the loads so that both warehouses get all of the goods. So that's what we're doing here. We're just going to build a little connection like so. Then I built this line to connect the lines kind of in a different way, if you will, so that you could bring stuff from the left side of our screen over to the right side. I actually don't even think I used that little connection at all after I rethought things. But anyway, the main thing is that kind of curling loop, which allows the two warehouses to send stuff back and forth between one another. Now here I kind of thinking and not thinking. I already have a city-to-city line between Shasta and San Francisco. And what I'm thinking here is, well, now I also need a line, a pass-through line through the warehouse. And what I'd kind of left out of my thought was, well, that's the same thing. We could run both those things through one line. So what I'm doing here is actually setting up an extra platform for that, what I think of as a new line for the pass-through warehouse, but really could have done this just simply by making a change to the existing line, which eventually I will go duh, and I will do that. And then, of course, we need to, if we're going to run a pass-through line, it's got to be able to pass through. So getting that supply tower out of the way, because I know I'm going to come right down like so and connect that warehouse into my existing track. So now, once that's done, we have the ability to run a pass-through setup, and we can run goods from Shasta to the warehouse, to San Francisco, and back to the warehouse. So we're going to put the matching goods, for the most part, in these two. The one exception will be sugar. We're going to pick up sugar in this pass-through. We don't need to pick up sugar over in the warehouse in Sacramento, because we already have a direct line for the sugar. Remember, we set that up to help our alcohol industry. And we're not going to tear that down just because we have a warehouse now, because we want to make sure that we have a steady flow of sugar going in there to keep our alcohol production up. Plus, that just unburdens the pass-through and the warehouse-to-warehouse lines, so that we won't, that's one more thing we don't have to, one less thing we have to carry. Now we'll run our wheat line and run it into that city-to-city line coming out of Shasta. And now we can run wheat into the pass-through warehouse. We've already got logs going into the Sacramento warehouse. So what we're going to do here is end up running logs and milk and what else? Corn over to the Sacramento side. And then we're going to run the wheat and veggies. And of course, we've got sugar already hooked up over here on the pass-through side. So let's move forward a little bit to where that's set up, and we can see the connection and how that's made, because that you need to be careful with how you do that if you go this route. Now, I was going to fast forward all the way through until all those lines were going into the warehouses, but I remembered that this section right here drove me nuts. And the reason is that we can't quite get the line to work to bring that milk into the Sacramento warehouse. And you'll see we've got it going in there. We've got a flat connection crossing that line. Decided that, there wasn't that much traffic, no reason to go flat. But you'll notice that I can't come out of that warehouse and go anywhere down here to the south of the warehouse. So there's got to be a problem here with that line. Now the line is ugly looking because you can't do those parallel crosses nice and tight, unfortunately. But it may be ugly, but what gives? And it took me a while to figure it out. But then see that yellow cone right there? That says that a track is not completed. This to me has to be a defect. We've run into this before. Some of you have even sent me comments about it. But you'll notice there's a missing connection right there. That track doesn't quite tie up. So the way to fix that is to delete a portion of the track and then reconnect it. And there we go. Now the yellow cone's gone. And now we should be able to set signals and run our lines the way we would expect. But it took me a while to figure that one out, and even though I've seen that before. So finally I've got that straight, and now we can run our milk in there to the Sacramento warehouse as intended. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention the reason that defect comes up is sometimes when you do those double tracking crosses like that, they don't always tie off the way they should. You have to be careful with that. Now we have our raw materials coming into the two warehouses. We've got some coming into one warehouse, some coming to the other. So how do we handle that? We're going to set up a line between the two warehouses. And out of the Sacramento warehouse, we do not want you to pick up wheat because you're going to bringing that over from the other warehouse. We don't want you to pick up veggies because you're also going to bring those over from the other warehouse. Now, on the pass-through side, we don't want you to take back any milk or corn or logs because those are coming over to us from the Sacramento warehouse. So we don't want to get in a position where we're just moving like logs back and forth. So if you're just careful with the way you set those up, as we just did there, you can set up lines between the two warehouses, and the trains will just exchange the goods and redistribute them so that you end up with both goods in both warehouses. And this is an excellent technique to use when you have a clumsy situation where you've got, and this happens all the time, where you've got some of your resources on one side of a set of tracks or mountain or whatever, and you've got another set of resources on the other side. If you put in two warehouses, run the raw materials into the warehouses that are on the quote right side unquote of the tracks, then you can load up your warehouses and then use the technique to move them back and forth to rebalance the load and get both warehouses having both sets of goods, or all the goods that you want them to have. So we check to see how we're doing, and we're looking pretty good on our alcohol, but I do want to go here to Yuma and bump that one up because Yuma's big enough. I can bump it up to level 2, and we've got good supplies of raw materials, so, and a warehouse to dump our production into, so that one's in good shape. We've got Sacramento working the same way, so we're looking good there. We need to finish it in 1854, and we should be able to do that. So now I realize that I've built a pass-through warehouse and nothing passing through it. So what we're going to have to do here is change all those trains that are existing and flip them over to run from Shasta to the warehouse, to San Francisco to the warehouse. And when I first start doing it, I forget to change them, but they actually also need to be freight only so that they won't be filled up with passengers and mail and we won't get any freight carried. And here's another key thing. Turn off the gold, because we've got our gold requirements done, and if we end up carrying just gold back from Shasta to San Francisco, it's going to be very hard to grow San Francisco. Now San Francisco does need gold, but remember it's getting it from Carson City. We have a direct line feeding it there, and so that's not going to be as much of a problem. But the big thing is we need to get logs and wheat and corn and milk and all that good stuff into San Francisco. And the way to do that is to turn off the gold coming through. Now, I didn't do this, but what I could have done is actually leave some trains going directly city to city that could have carried gold and passengers and mail. And that would have been just fine. That would have worked out okay because I've still got that track that was originally laid there. That could have been used, but I didn't do that, and it would have been traffic that I had to deal with anyway. So basically, by turning off the gold, making them freight only, city to city pass through, then we're going to get good flow of goods into San Francisco and Shasta, and both cities are going to be able to grow. And because we've got our nice little interchange between the two warehouses, the goods are going to be balanced out, and all the goods are going to be in both warehouses most of the time, so that we're going to have effective growth in Sacramento and an effective pass-through warehouse between Shasta and Sacramento, and we'll get really good city growth there. So let's wrap this one up right here. I hope you got something out of that one, and hope you can join us for our next episode. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it'll help you become a better player, and I hope you'll join us for our next Railway Empire video. Thank you.